Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone across the globe joining us today. My name is Karen Wood. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing here at Acquia, and I'm going to be moderating the webinar today, which is called How Data Can Boost Enrollment and Revenue Post-COVID. So before we hop into the webinar and introduce the rest of the speakers, we have a great panel lineup. I just wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, if you have any audio issues at all, go ahead and you can chat that in the chat interface, and we'll go ahead and help you take care of that. We are recording the webinar, so you will definitely get a recorded version of this after the fact, and as well as the slides. So we're very excited to get started. As I said, we have a great lineup of panelists. So let's go ahead and get started with the introductions. I think I sort of introduced myself, a little bit more about me. I came over to Acquia from the Agile One acquisition, so worked there for several years, focused on helping brands and other verticals across the spectrum leverage data to provide better experiences across the board. So I'm thrilled to be part of Acquia, and now I'm part of the Acquia Marketing Cloud team, where a customer data platform is a key part of it. Marvin, over to you.
Great. Hi, my name is Marvin Nui. I'm Senior Solutions Engineer here at Acquia. I work in the federal, higher education, and state and local areas. And I'm actually involved with talking to several folks, probably some of you out there in the audience now, about some of the different capabilities that we have to offer and what CDP can do for your organizations. So look forward to the discussion today.
And hi, I'm David. Let me just introduce myself here. David Robb, founder, CEO of the Customer Data Platform Institute, which is a vendor-neutral organization that helps companies and organizations make better use of their customer data.
Hi, Melissa Bradshaw. I'm the AVP of Marketing and Chief Marketing Enablement Officer at The Ohio State University. My role is really thinking about how we build the foundations to support modern marketing. So excited to be a part of the conversation today.
Hi everyone, I'm Lindsay Miles. I'm from Emory University, and I'm the Director of Digital Communications for our Advancement and Alumni Engagement Division. So we are responsible for reaching out to our constituents from a donor perspective, as well as the alumni of our university.
Perfect, thank you so much. So the way we're going to structure the webinar today is to start with just a few slides to set the context and talk about not only CDPs, but also the context within higher ed, and specifically talk a little bit about COVID, because that obviously has shaken up the industry quite a bit and has a lot of questions on people's minds about how to adapt to this new reality. Then for the bulk of the presentation, we'll actually pivot and have an interactive discussion with all of these panelists getting their thoughts on the stuff that we're going to talk about. So we have a lot of great stuff prepped. Let's go into again, it's just a couple of slides, but I think it will help frame up the conversation that we're about to have. So, you know, this is no secret. Our lives are different. In fact, we're all on Zoom right now. And the reason for that is, of course, this global pandemic that we're all figuring out how to address. For higher ed, what that means is everyone is looking at new ways and new opportunities to interact with students, parents, alumni, donors. Previous ways of interacting and engaging with those types of folks along the life cycle have evolved and dramatically changed in the last several months. And so it's a question that are on a lot of people's minds. So if you go to the next slide, a lot of the types of higher ed institutions that we're talking to are really trying to understand how to adapt to this new reality. So, you know, we're all on Zoom in this webinar right now, and I think Zoom is a really good example of a type of, in this case, company that has been able to adapt really quickly to the new reality. With things like adjusting with speed in terms of delivery and communication, innovating really fast to keep up with the new demand. And at the same time being able to mitigate the risks and increase efficiencies within their own company. And I think all of us, you know, within higher ed and even within B2B business as Acquia is in, can look at Zoom as a good example of being able to be very nimble and agile and try to understand how to leverage data and what they're already doing to reach their constituents in this new reality. So it's all, it always has been about delivering good experiences and increasing engagement across that life cycle. In this new world, there are new ways of doing it, and I think we're all trying to figure out the best way to do it. So if you go to the next slide, obviously it's all about connecting with students, donors, alumni, et cetera. I think at the end of the day, it is about connecting and trying to adapt to that. So, it's not just about Zoom. One thing that we've talked about with some of our higher ed customers here at Acquia is not only engaging them, but how do you deliver specific experiences? And how do you increase the amount of options that you're able to give to your constituents? So whether that is specifically e-learning only in the fall, or if it's going to be a mix or a choice of options. And then also, how do you engage with prospective students if they can't physically come to your campus and go on campus tours? How do you deliver an interactive experience? And how do you, at the end of the day, try to make sure that you don't have a decrease in enrollment, that you have an increase in engagement and enthusiasm and interest in your institution in this new reality? And the good news is it's definitely within reach. And I think that, again, what we're seeing is the data that brands are already leveraging to have experiences in the old world can be harnessed in this new way to deliver experiences in the new world too. So it's kind of the context to set. If we go to the next slide, I wanted to spend just a couple of moments talking about customer data platforms. As I mentioned earlier, that's obviously my background. We have David Robb here from the Customer Data Platform Institute. He and I have, we work closely together at Agile One as well in terms of helping a whole host of different companies and institutions leverage data in order to deliver more engaging experiences. The challenge is both the opportunity and the challenge, though, is the data itself. So how do you harness and untap that data in order to drive the experience? Well, CDPs have come on the scene and have been adopted by, again, a range of different brands in order to solve just that problem. If you go to the next slide, I'm not sure how closely you guys all follow Gartner, but Gartner has basically put a stake in the ground talking about CDPs. In fact, I think they defined it the same year that David on this call actually no, David, you defined the term first. If I believe customer data platform was first came on the scene as a new term in 2013, and then Gartner really adopted it in 2016. In any case, there's a ton of research out showing that if you unify data into a system and enable customer modeling and use that to optimize the timing and targeting of how you engage with the individuals you're trying to engage with, then you yield a better experience, you yield more revenue, you are more profitable as a business. And that's really what's driving this engagement and this interest in CDP. I mean, David works with a whole, all of the vendors who are customer data platforms and has a really great perspective on the market. But I think the key takeaway here is this is rising in importance. Retail was sort of an early adopter of a customer data platform. We're now seeing brands across the spectrum adopt CDPs and use that to harness their data to drive better engagement and experiences. So if you go to the next slide, just three things, very simple, but also kind of at the core of what every customer data platform does is creates that unified profile of the customer. In our case, we do that through identity resolution. So there's a lot that goes into what it takes to create that single view of the customer. Reveal customer insights. So another core tenet of a CDP is to make data really understandable, make it easy to get, easy to use. So just anyone, any marketer can go in and actually gain, very understandable insights from that unified profile. And then the third thing that a CDP must do is being able to activate that engagement. So once you have the profile, you can look at the data and understand it. Well, then you can actually use that data to engage with constituents on email or on the website or through direct mail, whatever channels of engagement chatbot you use to engage with those constituents. A CDP makes it very consistent, orchestrated, and makes it a much more streamlined experiences. And again, at the end of the day, that makes the experiences better for the constituents, and it also makes the company or the business more profitable. increases revenue. So with a CDP, they're all SaaS-based. Everything's on a real-time, SaaS platform. So that's another kind of criteria, if you will, of what we're seeing in CDPs. And if you go to the next slide, so this is an illustration kind of adapted from one of our actual customers. You can just go ahead and build it. It's fine. Yeah, perfect. That shows kind of the challenge that CDPs solve. So in this case, there's a POS system. So there's a physical kind of commerce presence, and the transaction information from that POS system is stored in a BI system that analysts can access. There's also an e-commerce element, so selling things online, the student store, et cetera. And some of that data goes into the CRM, and it also funnels into the BI system. However, only the analysts and IT have access to BI. So every time a marketer, if you look at the direct mail and email bubble, every time a marketer wants to send an email or send a direct mail to a specific list, they actually have to go to the IT or analyst team and ask them to pull that list, get the list, and then send it. That can take weeks. It can take a while. And again, marketers don't have that direct access, so they're sort of handcuffed a little. Meanwhile, engaging with constituents on digital ad platforms. So all of the personalized ads that are going out there are really only being harnessed by identity data. So third-party data, anonymous data is coming in to drive those audiences. But in this case, they're not able to leverage all this great information from the e-commerce system or the POS system. Anything that's in the BI tool is isolated in its own thing. There's a call center for people to call up and ask questions, completely isolated. All the call center has access to is previous calls, and in this case, they had access to transactions too. And then website personalization is also just doing its own thing. So long-winded way, but real-world example of the challenge. Like the data is there, it's just living in these different tools. And so a CDP really, at its heart, will bring the data together from these different systems, give direct access to the people who need to run campaigns based on that data, need to understand it, and be able to drive experiences from the data. And if you go to the next slide, this kind of illustrates that. So, before data's all over the place, a CDP really lines things up in a very organized way so that the data that lives in these different systems can come into the CDP, intelligence is applied, people can access it, again, run reports, understand it, and then it can go out to different channels, which really, if you look at it across the spectrum, is personalization, call center, outbound marketing, digital advertising, et cetera. So to go to the next slide, this illustrates different ways that you can, once you're able to tap into that data and harness it, that you can use it for all across the life cycle. So, a couple of examples would be for prospecting. So if you're doing a digital ad campaign, for example, to prospective students or even, to alumni and to donors, if you're doing targeted ads to them, you can actually use CDP data to look at things, for example, like alumni most likely to be high value donors. So you could run a lookalike model on that audience group and then use that for digital advertising in order to acquire and recruit new students that would therefore down the funnel, have that high value alumni presence. One example. You could also, if you have a current student, you could suppress them from your digital ad campaign so that you're not spending money on ads to people who are already students and you don't need to target them anymore. Two examples for digital advertising or acquisition. For engagement and growth and growing that audience, tons of ways to use that unified data for that. So for direct mail, you could take, students who maybe haven't been as engaged and you want to up their engagement and bring them into new programs that they're not involved in currently. You could use direct mail, email, SMS, if they've engaged with SMS, to really do that outbound reach and that outbound marketing in order to grow and further engage a specific audience. So it's a lot easier to do that when you have the insights that are coming from all of those tools. So those are just some examples. Obviously personalization too, and so not just the outbound marketing, but even the one-to-one personalization. So I mentioned a call center. If you have, recruitment or advisors who are available via the phone, they can actually have that 360 view of the constituent and be able to understand exactly who that person is, all the engagement they've done across the website, any in-person, back when in-person was more of a thing, any in-person engagement, how they've engaged with emails, et cetera, and really be able to track and match that conversation when they call up to the call center, to be able to have that one-to-one experience. So not only can this drive really much more refined outbound marketing, but once you are in a one-to-one situation with a constituent, you can use data to really drive that experience home so that it's hyper relevant. And again, the goal is to boost revenue, profitability, and so on. So those are just some examples. If you go to the next slide, I think Marvin had some additional examples of things that he's seen. So I'll turn it over to you, Marvin, to go into that.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Yeah, so the bottom line really is that CDP use in the EDU space is still fairly new. And especially now with COVID happening and all these changes that are going on with students doing online courses, it's going to be all that more important. And we're going to start seeing more use cases that come out of this. I'm not going to read off this slide, but in general, there's really, I would say, 3 or 4 different use cases or general use cases that Karen already alluded to when it comes to the EDU space. I know my daughter just, is a freshman in college, and last year we were getting a lot of, outbound marketing materials. She was getting a lot of newsletter, like emails and mailers and newsletters. And a lot of them were irrelevant to her. She wanted to go into engineering, and she was getting a lot of liberal arts mail. That's additional spending that can be saved using technologies like CDP to start hyper targeting these segments, understanding. And how is that done? Well, right now we have a lot of sources. Their kids are chatting on Instagram and Snapchat and whatever things that I can't even keep up with them. But there's information in there. They're asking questions like, hey, is anyone at the engineering school, or has anyone gone to this, or does anyone know? And we can start harnessing that information to start segmenting these students into what we call clusters. And that's the first sort of use case that I'm seeing a need for. People asking about is like, how do we segment? Right now it's very manual. You kind of try and get all that information and manually put them together. But now with CDPs, it can be done using machine learning and targeting and being able to monitor these social channels and be able to sort of cluster these students and then save money because you're not sending irrelevant materials to others. The other category is digital advertising type of things where suppressing, I know how many of you have gone to, Amazon.com, and then you come back to the site and there's like shoes or you've purchased something and then you're getting ads that are coming in that are saying, oh, you already bought the shoes, but now they're sending you a coupon for 30%. And they're like, oh, I didn't get that 30% discount. These are opportunities as well where you can actually start personalizing websites or going out onto the social media channels and being able to push out relevant information to students as they're communicating online to create sort of that, engagement using this sort of profiling and data piece of it. And then the last thing I'll kind of touch on is the ability to just engage and provide unique personalities. Karen touched on it where there's those 3 components. The last is activating. So once you actually know these segments, you've kind of profiled it, you can start activating next actions, such as maybe sending a newsletter or maybe sending a targeted personal text message to a student to try and drive them to learn more about a program. How do they actually get student aid, which is a big thing in terms of the complexities, really walking them through from that personal approach and really making them feel like they're cared for. Because that's like a big thing that's in there is that personalized, they feel like they're kind of a unique case in it and they're being treated, special because it's really relevant to their information. And I know there's a whole bunch of other use cases out there that I'm sure is going through your heads right now in your audience. And feel free to add those to the chat within our Zoom window. You'll see that sort of chat in there. We'll monitor that as it goes through. So if there, we can, include that in our discussions in terms of your specific use cases and how a CDPA would apply to that use case. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, thanks, Marvin. So let's move to the panel discussion part of this webinar. We have a few questions prepped. And Melissa, I'd like to start with you because I know you and your team has a current initiative around a CDP. So I'm hoping you could talk a little bit about the strategic discussion and the objectives that you had when you were considering whether or not you needed a CDP.
Sure, thanks, Karen. So I guess first let me kind of back up to just what my team does. So our team is the university marketing unit, where we really focus on facilitating across the entire brand or across the enterprise a connected experience. And so with that, my team doesn't necessarily execute for enrollment or for alumni and donors, but we look for that through thread to make sure that those experiences are consistent. Part of our strategic imperatives is about deepening our audience understanding. And so, our group was developed about 5 years ago, and that was sort of a journey for us to understand that how do we deepen audience understanding when we see our audiences engaging in silos across the university. Often our audiences wear multiple hats, whether you're an athletics fan and a parent, and a prospective student, and a patient. And so the idea that we have all these different silos of data across the university was something we knew we needed to shift in order to deepen our understanding. And so at the same time, I believe roughly around when we started to try to activate some of this, then GDPR happened, and we started to learn that it was going to be very challenging to infuse data into the marketing practice. So we started to explore a CDP because not only are we trying to build relationships with our IT partners, we also recognize getting all this data in one place was going to be a very challenging endeavor. Not only getting it in one place, but also activating it specifically for the marketing function. I think that was right about the same time CDP was becoming very prevalent, and so we started to explore that as an option. So we've really kind of locked in on that as our path forward. We've engaged, analytics, business intelligence, and IT partners across the way so that we're making the right decisions along the way, and we're helping drive a deepening of understanding around how data can be leveraged for marketing. So it's really it's a collaborative across the university in terms of a CDP, why we need one, and how it can be used.
Yeah, thank you. So you mentioned GDPR, and CCPA is not far behind it. David, I'd love your perspective, if you don't mind just jumping in here. Across the board, you're seeing how GDPR is affecting tons of different brands and companies and institutions. How do you see a customer data platform's role in helping folks like Melissa and her team address GDPR and regulatory requirements?
Well, certainly in Europe in particular, where GDPR has gotten the most attention, I sometimes think of it as the CDP Full Employment Act, because GDPR has been putting a lot of attention on the need to organize your customer data and make sense of it, because you can't comply with GDPR unless you really know where all the data is, and you can reach out to it and assemble it if someone wants to see it, and hide it if someone wants it hidden. So the work that you have to go through to prepare for GDPR is very similar to the work that you have to do to prepare for a CDP, and the CDP gives you a place to actually store that information. The U.S., of course, GDPR is relevant, but not as relevant. A lot of institutions, even higher ed institutions, have foreign students who would definitely be subject to GDPR, protected by GDPR now, with the California Act coming up and it's about to go into effect in July 1. They just made the deadline to do that. You're going to have all the California issues, which are not the same as GDPR, but similar. So it's all about getting your customer data organized and being able to do the things with it that you need to do and to control how it's used. And those are all exactly the things that a CDP makes possible. So it's super helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Lindsay, let's turn to you. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about your current approach to planning engagement opportunities for alumni, particularly now in our COVID environment. But do you have a segmentation strategy? And maybe you could talk a little bit about the alumni lifecycle as it pertains to you and your team, and how you engage with alumni across that lifecycle.
Sure. So we do have a lot of opportunity with our alumni whenever it comes to engagement. And I think right now, as many institutions across the country are dealing with, is how do we transform that into a digital experience that's meaningful? And so as we look at, we have a multitude of platforms that we can kind of get data from, from our CRM, from social listening, and, some other MarTech, platforms. I think we like to hear from our alumni, and we monitor our social media, but we also we just got finished with a survey. We're developing personas. So we're really trying to get to know what our audience wants outside of just the constraints that we find ourselves in right now when it comes from, an engagement standpoint. But when we think about our segmentation strategy, of course, those personas that we're developing as it relates to alumni will help us have a deeper, strategy, because we will understand more, much like what is done in the e-commerce and in the commerce sector, is we will understand the actions and behaviors of our alumni in a much different way. And it really extends beyond that as well, right? Because our constituents are friends of the university, parents, just community members that are interested in our programming. So we think about these engagement opportunities as it's relevant to our constituents. And this is a new area for us. The leader of our division is very in tune with creating a personalized experience and what that means. And so, of course, that will be seen in our communication strategy as well, right? So we meet people where they are. If the channel that we find, current students in is TikTok, okay, well, we'll explore a TikTok strategy if that's what we need to do. Or, we think about email marketing in much of the same way. The industry has been thinking about email marketing in much of the same way over the last decade. And we're really trying to think about, as an institution, as a division, how do we connect with people in a meaningful way, but then also gets them to convert, whether that is attend an event, watch a webinar, make a gift to our university. And so we're really trying to think about what that segmentation strategy is on a persona basis, and then moving forward and kind of developing what that looks like with our outreach strategies and our distribution strategy.
Yeah, exciting. The next question is for the group at large, so anyone can just jump in here. But, kind of to your point, you're working on personas and looking at data and starting with really analyzing who you're actually reaching out to, which is a really important first step. But if you came to the point where you actually do have the data into one place and you are able to recognize personas and really dive into the data, I guess the question for the team is, what would be the most pressing area? Would you use that first and foremost for enrollment, for alumni? I mean, I think that's your area of focus, Lindsay. So for you, it's probably alumni. But just where do you think the most urgent place is to apply that insight and knowledge that you would be able to glean from the data?
Sure. The challenge with prioritization is hard. Universities are, like Lindsay alluded to, are trying to address a lot of different audiences with a lot of different objectives, goals, choices that we're trying to inspire them to make. At Ohio State, we have 26 what we call macro audiences. Those are not segments, right? And so prioritization is hard to say what's most pressing, but I think where I see a huge opportunity is with our alumni and our donors, because their intentions with our university aren't really widely understood or known, right? They're kind of post the cycle, or they're the people that we're really trying to capture and understand. And so a CDP, whether that's first party data or even pulling in third party data to understand what moves those people, what are their interests, so that we can find the right facet of the university to speak to what moves them. Something with alumni and donors that we're thinking about is really cause marketing. I may be really passionate about cancer. We have a great cancer hospital. And so how do we match that potential donor alum with engagement opportunities with that facet of the university?
Yeah, Melissa or Lindsay, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, how prioritization, is hard. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it is difficult, but we think about pipeline development, especially if we just take the alumni, piece. So if students, ideally, right, if a student is engaged while they are at the institution, they will then become engaged alumni. That's the idea. And if we had those engagement touch points, what their interests are in a robust way that transcends just what we as a division of advancement and alumni engagement are inputting. If we could then sync it up, let's say with our admissions team or, with student works or things like that, it would make for a more robust, comprehensive, consistent experience, right? No matter who the constituency is, I think consistency is really important for outreach, and having that data all in one place really allows for us to create, as marketers, like Melissa talked about, we are then able to tap into what are their interests and really serve up content that's relevant to them instead of them wading through, 17 stories related to something when all they care about is cancer. Having our data in one place really allows for us to hone in on those interests.
Yeah, and David, I'm curious what you're seeing. You work with a lot of different types of businesses and industries. What we've seen at Agile One and now at Acquia is it is definitely a crawl, walk, run. So there's sort of initiatives in year one, initiatives in year two. What are you seeing? And I don't know if you can draw any generalizations in terms of once you have the data in one place, what's the first thing that the marketers tend to do, and then how do they roll that out over time? Do you have any insight in that?
Well, it does seem to be a pattern that many people follow, and it really relates to the evolution of the underlying data. So the first thing that they'll do, and someone mentioned developing personas, this is the first time they've ever had the data assembled in one place. So the natural thing first to do is let's analyze this data. We have a new toy to play with as analysts, so we want to do that. So they do a lot of analysis. Once they have the analysis, the next thing you tend to do is, well, let's build some predictive models. Now we couldn't do that before, and we can now begin to take the data we analyzed and do something useful with it. Then after that, you tend to see the outbound communications because, okay, now we have some models, we can predict what people are going to do. Let's do some better segmentation on our outbound, so our email or our direct mail or whatever other messaging we're using. And then finally, you tend to do the real-time interaction, which is the hardest to do because that involves very intimate integrations with your other systems. So you tend to do that a little last. And then maybe even after that is the cross-channel orchestration. Some people might want to do that sooner, but that is a very complicated thing to do because not only do you have to connect all your systems, you have to kind of connect everything in real time talking to each other. So if there is in fact a progression that we see a lot of companies go through, obviously, your mileage may vary. Some people in particular might do some of the real time stuff sooner, just almost as a demonstration process of look at this cool thing that we can do. Aren't you glad you gave me all this money for the CDP? But that is the hardest thing to do, so you do that one sparingly. Okay,
great. I'd like to Marvin, unless you had anything to add to that in terms of use cases and what you're seeing across the board in the companies that you're working with. Oh, you're still on mute. Sorry, didn't mean to catch you off guard.
Yep, sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah.
Lucky for video, you can see me talking. No, not too much to add other than, CDPs and these technologies are really introducing some new ideas. We tend to talk about, Melissa had mentioned silos, people working sort of their own little groups. It's a real opportunity now to start taking those, because the whole idea of a CDP is that unified profile and the entire life cycle. So you can literally now in the higher ed space start nurturing students at the high school level and carry that all the way through until they graduate. And then at the same time, develop the experience. I know that my daughter, when she started college, it was chatting. Everyone was chatting with each other like, oh, how is your check into the dorm like? And some is really bad and some aren't. And that actually reflects, like, it makes them think, oh, I wish I went to NYU. Or, they started brag, it's almost like bragging rights. Like ours was like this, virtual reality thing that walked us through. I already knew what my room looked like. So those are sort of the things that these opportunities are coming up. And again, it's such a new space that these technologies are really making us think a little bit differently on how we pursue, not just enrollment, but just the entire life cycle of any student or alumni, or even staff and professors as they start doing research and things like that.
That's exactly right. I think, the opportunities, Marvin, as you alluded to, is really kind of, I think people get that spark when the ideas come out, right? And a lot of times, I'm saddled with the how. How do we get this done? And often all roads lead to data and needing to understand what's driving someone to, is this going to be effective? Who do we target, right? And so continually as these new ideas, and I think great ideas come up, we also want to, to invest in those things, we have to demonstrate the value. And so the more opportunity we have to aggregate data, to demonstrate, hey, we do have a set of personas here that would be receptive to this type of experience or that type of content is critical.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I'd like to pivot for a second and just talk a little bit more specifically about COVID. One of the things we're seeing a lot is this pressing need for agility and being able to, quickly pivot to different ways of engaging with constituents, where you, as in the past, maybe you were leaned into more in-person or specific, physical channels or physical engagement, as now moving online. And within online, that can mean a lot of different things, like you mentioned virtual walkthroughs of the dorm and things like that. So I guess the question is, I think universities are in a particularly tricky spot because enrollment, is ongoing. Enrollment is obviously a concern. I think there are a lot of questions, and it's different from university to university in terms of what is going to happen next year with the 2020-21 calendar school year. So I guess the question is, what would you do, and how do you see data helping with agility? And have you talked about that? And what are you, Melissa, you and Lindsay in particular, thinking about in terms of how you can stay agile and use data to address this really confusing time, and a time where there is going to be rapid change and evolution of your business? Lindsay, maybe you can start.
So one of the things that, we're really fond of on the team that I'm a part of, Advancement Communications, is thinking about failing forward. And I think, while we look at COVID and we look at the opportunities and maybe the changes that we're seeing and the uncertainty, it still is an opportunity for us to explore those technologies that can help us move the needle. And so some of those things, we had to be really quick about, right? We had to start thinking about let's pivot all of these webinars to Zoom or GoToMeeting or whatever these digital platforms are. But then, we have an events team who's really thinking about how do you make a really engaging event when you're virtual and, people are doing this in conferences, but then also investigating, adding some tools to our MarTech stack to think about what does the engagement look like. This is really the time to test that out, because really you have nothing to lose. People are wanting engagement. Our daily habits are changing. It used to be that maybe you send emails at 5 a.m. and that's when they get the open rates, but now we're all plugged in all the time. Those things are out the window. So we're really trying to look at this time to think about, what are those test cases that we've been wanting to try for so long at a smaller scale that it's little to no risk to try this out. So that's kind of, some of the things we've been thinking about in our university, in our division.
Yep. And I think likewise on our end. So part of the journey we've been on for probably about a year or 2 years now is really thinking about the MarTech stack. How do we mature it? So bringing new capabilities to the institution. Certainly that, in higher ed time, right? That's potentially, a slower paced objective. And so what's been happening, I think, really over the last few months with such disruption is a lot of those things are accelerating. Folks across the university are finding almost a near immediate need to say, oh, that thing you've been talking about for 2 years, I need it now. And so it's really put us in a position to accelerate some of these capabilities and leverage data for marketing in a way that hasn't been done at such a broad scale. I also think about our audiences shifting. So we're moving from just digitally savvy to digital native. And so the case for how you see me as a prospective student, my expectations, right? Marvin mentioned the Amazon sort of approach. I mean, it's not acceptable to this generation to not know, not know what I'm interested in, especially if I'm filling out forms and you have the data somewhere at the university. And so, you know, I think it's given us a real charge. We've learned a lot about ourselves as an institution and how we can truly operate in an agile fashion. But we're still learning. And, you know, the goal is that we'll continue the pace as we move into the next few months here.
And David, how are you seeing, oh, yeah, go ahead. I was just going to ask.
I'll just jump in. Yeah, because in EDUs and every place else for that matter, we've seen tremendous acceleration. We hear stories of, you know, digital transformation projects that would have taken months or years, not weeks, and companies trying new things and even sometimes buying new MarTech, but also kind of digging into the MarTech that they have and making better use of it, because obviously people are worried about spending more money. And I think to some extent people have a little more time because they're stuck at home, and you know they're all on Zoom meetings constantly, but they're not at least they're not losing, you know, an hour each way in traffic. So there's a little more openness to experimentation, a little more opportunity to experimentation. And a little more forgiveness, if forgiveness is a word, for people, you know, yeah, we'll try this thing. You know, like you're not seeing my picture today because we have some connectivity issues, but nobody's going to be too upset. If this were back in the day, this would have been a crisis. Oh my God, what do you mean I see your picture? I'll have to redo it. So it's a good thing. We have a lot of opportunity to test new things out, as Melissa was saying, and it's again, not just in education, across the board. And it is opening up some very exciting opportunities, things that we kind of would have maybe played with, and now we really have a chance to do. We actually have to do, because we can't do the old stuff. We have time freed up. It's not just, you know, spent setting up physical events, which is a huge part of the work that people have with education. And so now they can do some other stuff, and they have to do some other stuff. So it's not, of course, that it's a good thing, but at least is it an opportunity for sure.
All right, great. Well, another question here. I guess I'd like to ask about your current tech stack. So what are you currently using? And I guess maybe we can combine that question with what are you excited about? What initiatives do you have coming down the pike? Do you have any, are you transforming any of the tools in your tech stack? Yeah, I mean, what are you thinking about both current and kind of future state for your tech stacks?
Yeah, so we're, like I said before, we're a highly decentralized environment. So out of the 7,000 tools, we probably have half of them at Ohio State as far as marketing technology goes. But in all seriousness, I think that, you know, we do have a wide variety of email service providers, from the MailChimps to Constant Contacts into maturity around marketing automation. We hold multiple marketing automation platforms at Ohio State. Google Analytics, right? There's lots of different platforms that are sitting around the university, different CRMs. And so, you know, the tools in our stack, we're working towards consolidation where it makes sense. There's certainly areas of the business that are not marketing, and so, but they might need an email service provider that has nothing to do with marketing. It has to do with, you know, research, let's just say. And so our focus is really thinking about how do we consolidate that to a core set for marketing. And with that, you have the benefit of the broader understanding, whether that's with enrollment or with alumni or current students, right? If we're using the same core stack, then we can start to understand that journey, that life cycle, as Lindsay had spoke about earlier. And so my focus is really thinking about how we map those tools together to not only drive efficiency, but that audience understanding across the board. Yeah, that's it.
Lindsay?
So I was going to add, and thinking about our marketing technology, I echo, Melissa's sentiments. We got a lot of people doing a lot of stuff, using a lot of things. And so when we think about it, just specifically to our division, we've really been thinking about what that stack looks like. And we've been using some data technology. Of course, higher ed is slow to adopt new ideas and new technologies, but we're right now thinking about our web experience and what that looks like for our constituents. And we're not only thinking about our website, and we're going to be using Acquia Lift to inform, what the participant is looking at on the website, but then also Salesforce Marketing Cloud. We just recently acquired Salesforce Marketing Cloud. We have a platform that we use called Evertrue, and it allows us to see what alumni are engaging on our social media posts, what their giving history is, what their graduation, a lot of information that's being brought together, but we have to go to a lot of places, right, to get that information. And then, of course, we have a CMS, and we're trying to change over what our CMS is for the website. So, while we have a lot going on right now, we are really making an effort, because we've acquired it, to try to centralize some of that as much as we can for the alumni, the donor, these audiences of people that we, kind of control or oversee that outreach for. And I think it's going to be really helpful because, like Melissa said, when you have, so many things and so many opportunities for technology integration, you start to realize, wow, there's a lot out there, and we aren't patrolling all of it, and some of it we don't want to patrol. But in order to make it for a comprehensive experience, it's important for all that data to kind of live in one place, and that's where we're moving as an institution.
And just to add, what I'm most excited about is exactly that, the integration of the platforms, but not only that, is understanding something that we haven't done before, which is understanding how people are engaging across them. So how does one interaction, maybe it's an in-person interaction, affect your online journey? Or, here I am on social making a comment, and what does that look like in terms of my receptiveness to, my web journey or email that I click on, right? So that omni-channel experience is something we're really trying to push as well. We're working to build a center of expertise around omni-channel strategy, so that we're not thinking about system by system and only what I know in that system, but really broadening our sights on truly understanding the person in that one-to-one engagement, as you guys talked about earlier.
Exciting. Well, we have some questions from the audience that are starting to come in. I know we just have a little bit of time left. So if you as an audience member would like to type your question in, I think now is your chance. So go ahead and get that in and we'll try to get to it. This question I'd like to pose to Marvin and then also maybe get David to weigh in. So the question is, how long does it take to get a CDP off the ground in terms of investment, staff resources, how much does it cost to purchase, et cetera? I'm going to go out on a limb and say it depends on your use cases and kind of the crawl, walk, run strategy that you put in place. But Marvin, I'll let you answer it, and then David, I'd love your perspective too, since you work with so many CDPs.
Great, thanks, Carrie. So yeah, exactly what you said. It depends. And the approach is usually a crawl, walk, run. And hopefully, can everyone hear me okay? Is my audio still okay? Okay. Primarily, you always want to start off with sort of that unification of the profiles. So again, just like we were talking about the different tech stack, depending on how many different types of technologies you have out there that you want to draw that information from to start building that unified profile, it could take, several months to maybe even a year to kind of clean all that data up and get it all fixed up. That doesn't mean you can't start taking advantage of it until after a year, because you can start building up, a profile slowly as time goes on. So again, it's all about strategy and how quickly you want to do it. But the key thing is to keep in mind that as you start moving forward, to keep sort of the future in mind, because you don't want to build the foundation a weak foundation and build on top of that weak foundation. Cost-wise, again, that also depends, again, with the number of technology stacks that you have and what kind of integrations are going to be needed. if you're using sort of your own proprietary system, that might be a little bit more expensive versus something that's, a standard that's, already out there and has like services that are exposed. David, I'm not sure if you had anything to add on that in terms of what you've experienced.
Well, again, it indeed does depend. That's going to be the answer you're going to hear from everyone. But a really quick initial implementation might be 60 to 90 days. That's a reasonable expectation to get at least a couple of data sources and a couple of initial use cases up. Again, going back to the crawl, walk, run. In terms of the cost, it really is usually based on the number of customers or contacts or entities, unique IDs, whatever they are, but people that you're managing. There are some CDPs that deal with small businesses that'll sell for a 1,000 or a 10,000 name list, and you might pay a couple $1,000s a month for that. Most of the CDPs that you would be using in an organization of any size, you're rarely going to be under $50,000 a year. You're really $100,000 or $150,000 is the starting point for most of the CDPs that we see. So it's not a cheap investment. Let's be blunt about that. And obviously, budgets are tight everywhere, and particularly in the education field these days. So, this is not something that you're going to pay $20 a month for. It's not a Zoom subscription, but it is something that you are going to get some value from. And you're also going to commit a lot of human resource too. So honestly, even if they gave it to you for free, you would still have substantial cost of people involved in setting it up and running it and doing something with it. So it's something that takes some planning and some commitment and some negotiation within the organization to get support for it.
Yeah, I would actually just add to that, David. We've seen with the customers that we've worked with at Agile One and now at Acquia, the most successful implementations are when there is that alignment across different teams. And Melissa, I think you mentioned that you are working on some cross-functional alignment as part of your initiative. And I think that's really critical to making the initiative successful, is when you can get marketing, IT, customer, experience, whatever teams, touch customer data and leverage customer data, get them involved in the project. And, even better when it comes from the top down, so all teams can align around, even how they're incented and comped, and then how data can take a role in it.
Right.
You mentioned it's a significant investment. It's, a significant payoff as well, we've seen too. I mean, it is, the customers who have engaged with us as a CDP are not one and done. They're not like using us for a year and then they're out. I mean, they are in it for year 1, 2, 3. I mean, we have customers who've used us for, upwards of 8 years and on. I mean, there's no end in sight, kind of as you mentioned, David. Once you start using it, you always can bring in more data sources. You always can leverage data for more use cases. So,
and Karen, if I could add that, I think that's the beauty of the CDP and why we ultimately landed there as a solution. We actually did conduct an RFI earlier this year, just to help us evaluate build versus buy solutions. And what we found is, and this was a group of IT across the university, data security and privacy folks, business intelligence, analytics, and marketing, right? So we all got around the table, looked at all of these options, and what we found was the build solutions felt really labor intensive and not necessarily scalable without additional tenfold resources versus the CDP, where we know there's going to be resource involved, but it really was, the solution was engineered in a way that felt more scalable, that seemed, more, I think, in alignment with what we're trying to do, especially knowing how many systems, shift. The marketing landscape, the marketing technology landscape shifts. And so we need to be poised and ready to integrate data from a new chatbot, right, that somebody's, going to post on their site next month. And so that agility is really critical for us. And I think that's one of the selling points for CDP for us. And I think a space why we're really focused there.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm getting the signal that it's time to wrap up. I just want to say thank you so much to our panelists, all of you. This is a really engaging discussion. I really appreciate your time today. Hopefully this was informative for everyone else who joined. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We have recorded this. We will have the slides available. We'll be following up with you. Please feel free to share this with your team. And if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out.